Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. All right, I'm just walking away from the monitor, making sure my voice is just as strong. Looks like it is. Okay, so I'm on a Bluetooth microphone. Woohoo! Got a phone pointed at the TV, arguably in the bedroom. I don't recommend putting a computer in the bedroom. Maybe not a Windows computer in the bedroom. An Apple computer, maybe. Something that the user doesn't constantly swear and fight against the system. I don't like bringing that energy into the bedroom. All right, look, from what I can see, this is solid. So I've got the volume on the game at a fairly low level from some speakers on the other side of the telly, you could argue. Very, very low level. Because I'm using a Bluetooth microphone, when I go and sit back 4 meters away from where I am right now, the sound of the fans and the computer should drop right off. So I'm just going to lean over them a bit. All right, you can hear them. Now, I'm a gamer who loves silent gaming, quiet gaming. It's been a thing for me for years. Like, if you run 2 video cards, you play Battlefield, you've got yourself a Vega. AMD Vega could do 4K at 60 frames a second with everything ultra in Battlefield 1, which is a game, you know, some people like. Anyway, 4K 60, when you want to play on the lounge room TV, and you need a 4K 60 low, one Vega could do it. But if you put 2 Vegas in the machine, instead of one card taking 250 watt of power because it's right at its bleeding edge and generating lots of heat, and therefore lots of noise, its fan is running loud, you find that with perfect scaling, which Battlefield is one of a few games, The Witcher we're looking at right now is another game with great scaling for 2 video cards, at least back in the day when that was a thing. Yeah, and if you play Battlefield 1, you use 2 video cards. The per card wattage, 100 watts, dropping down to 80, right? Just sip power. Cards would be silent. And there is nothing like playing a video game, like Battlefield 1, a war game, and you're in a forest, and you can hear a pin drop in your room because you can't hear a single fan, right? Like literally, you're in an absolutely quiet room. So every little tree breaking or cracking in the forest is just immersive. Anyway, it's fair to say for many, many years now, I've always been a fan of quiet games. Always been a fan of overclocking, always been a fan of knowing what the limits are of my card, finding where the voltage goes up massively, i.e. where the efficiency just drops right off. I make sure that the upgrades I do to the card in terms of speed translate to actual speed improvements, right? So there's no point having your card running at a super fast speed and then you run a benchmark that benchmarks like less than 1% better. You're drawing heaps more power from the wall. The numbers look like they're 10% better, but the output is 1% better, right? That's not a good overclock. So it's always about stability. And for me, that's number one. I target low frame rates. So I'm just going to point at the screen for a brief moment before I get back into bed. This here, the reason I'm sitting in this corridor, this game's been running for hours. I've been running all around town. I've already done videos prior to this morning, but they all, for whatever reason, stopped, ran out of recording space or batteries are run low on microphones and stuff. But in all my running around town, the point of my story, and I've already said it, but this is new to this recording, the only recording I'm putting up, so I'll say it again with a 30-second intro to saying nothing important, so that you just go, oh, this is my life, ending one 30-second increment at a time. 99th percentile, that's your 1% low, and that there is sitting at 60. Right, and that's actually what I targeted for. This courtyard with 30 odd people in it with all the hairworks and all the ray tracing, everything running. I don't think hairworks is on other characters, Geralt and the wolves and a couple of characters you fight maybe. Most people have pretty basic hairdos, but all the same, 30 odd body people all dancing around in a courtyard during the day. That's pretty taxing. All the settings are set to ultra. And what I had to do is I had to tweak this game to raise my 1% lows up to 30. And just a little bit of housekeeping, actually, regarding my recent overclocks. I found with this game, this was the only game where I couldn't hit, but 99, my 1% low at 30, right? It was sitting at 28. And I was like, oh, man, I've got to fix that. And then I discovered the frame doubling technologies. And it's like, at Hogwarts, I can't get the 99th percentile above 30 the entire game, right? If I fly my broom all around the map at high speed, there's 2 or 3 points, usually on transitions to new areas, where you know, you can tell your hard drive access that the game's now coding in a new area, and that 1% low will actually drop back to that 30 frame rate that I target for. It actually drops back to about 28, and that's when the frame doubling technology gets caught out. You see a kind of like a doubling of like a shadow version of the main character, if you're panning the camera quickly and stuff. If you're trained to spot those idiosyncratics of the technology, if you will, you'll see them. But if you can tune above 30 on your 99th percentile here, your 1% lows, what I find is that you don't see any graphical issues. And that the AMD drivers now, you can use chill to trim the upper frame rates. There is reasons to do this. So you can tweak it so that you sit very comfortably within that range. And I'll give an example. If I trim my upper frame rate from, at the moment it's probably sitting at 80, but I've trimmed it back towards 70 or 60, it still consumes the same amount of power. What it does is that when it renders each frame to the screen, it just does them at a higher quality. So it's probably worth tweaking it. Really is worth learning your technology and getting there. But if you're watching this video, you're not the sort of person who likes to tweak yourself, or maybe you are and you just want to see if it's worth playing with beta drivers to muck around with technologies that are shortly to come to market. But for me, it's been a real game changer. All the games I had to play on mouse for a lack of latency, which was The Witcher, Hogwarts, all the open world games that I'm just brute forcing at stupid levels of rendering. We're all at 30 frames a second with no latency on a mouse. Were perfect, so long as the 1% lows were right. There was never any. It's not called frame generation, but it's input. When your inputs are 100% and they respond instantly, you feel it, right? And I found as someone who's gamed at 200 frames a second since the 90s, just about always, and always had high refresh rate monitors and powerful cards to render at high frame rates, high refresh rates. I don't mind playing a slow-paced game at a lower refresh rate. Kingdom Come Deliverance was a really good example of a game that at 30 frames a second, it's a slow-paced role-playing game, but if you can get above 45 frames a second, the combat in Kingdom Come Deliverance is brilliant. It's like an arcade. It's just got such a flow to it. And the difference of Kingdom Come Deliverance at 30 frames versus 60 frames, or anything above 45 frames, it's a totally different game to play. And for a lot of games that have an animation system where you hit a button and then there's a couple of frames before it animates what it is you're trying to do, the inherent delays built into them, they're perfectly fine to play on a wireless controller. Like you never feel 100% in responsive control of the scenario anyway. There's always that slight lag. And for any non-competitive game, if you're not online in a first-person shooter and you need that 6 millisecond heads up over another competitor in terms of where something is in the game world, because you need your screen to update a bit quicker, right? Frame doubling technologies and stuff, they're just not going to work in those competitive spaces. If you're a competitive fighting game player and you need to see the moment someone starts to throw a punch or do a certain block, you need that first frame of actual useful information to get to your screen as quickly as possible. And there are times when high frame rate gaming is just about essential. But as you'll read in many a forum, anyone that grew up on games like GoldenEye, Descent on the PlayStation ran at like 8 frames a second. It sped up to 15 frames a second. I'm sure there are areas where it nearly probably hit 30. But anyone that's come from the bygone era of gaming, Atari 2600s, and seeing pixels, counting the pixels down the side of your screen from meters away, right? That was a thing. Like gaming keeps evolving. Gaming can be quicker. There are some games that can be tweaked. And I tell you, a slow-paced role-playing game, so long as the responsiveness of it is where it needs to be, and you feel that your interactions are instant, a lot of the games that I tweak, certainly on a low refresh rate OLED screen, 22 milliseconds basically for the frame to render to the screen, it feels perfect. Like 30 frames a second gaming is very doable. And I've got friends who have worked in the hi-fi industry and they sell televisions. They're very aware of the latency in that. They'll buy a different brand TV that claims better numbers and figures, but it's a mass market brand TV, arguably. And the numbers all sound very impressive, but when they play 30 frames a second games, they find them unplayable. And then they come around to my place and play the same games. I'm talking on console, not even on PC where there's settings that can be changed. And they experience, right? These are people who know how to set game mode. And these people who know what they're doing when tweaking a TV, and they've been doing it for decades, like for a long time. It's true that not everybody's experience of something they're talking about is your experience. And whenever we put our blinkers on and we stop listening to people on the basis that, oh, no, they don't know what they're talking about, 30 frames a second is horrible, for example. A lot of people say that. It might be true. But as someone that can tweak my own equipment as someone who's experienced high refresh rate gaming, and as someone that has experienced what a lot of the current computer cheaty technology is, that's like, oh, it's not really rendering at 4K. We're going to quadruple your frame rate using this technology that nobody really knows what's happening in this little black box of numbers. It's like, yeah, we do. We do. There's reasons why your new technologies are so sellable. It's because you're tweaking to make them look so effective. Anyway, I'm not going to tell a negative story. Tell a happy story. Everyone's happy. So anyway, look, the point of my story here is that this is a fully overclocked. Let's put a Bluetooth controller on. I might play this game on Bluetooth controllers now with a little bit of latency because it's so fast. It just updates to the screen so quick, and it feels really quite zippy. Okay, so The Witcher. The Witcher was like the only game that I couldn't get running satisfactorily with that low frame rate above 30. Now, I'm talking here at high resolution with every setting cranked, including Hairworks, which most people who benchmark just won't even turn on. But seriously, looks awesome. Why wouldn't you turn it on? It's awesome. It looks so good. You go find a couple of wolves or a griffin out in the wilders. You see all the feathers or all the extra fur around the collar of some of the wolves. Oh man, lovely. Anyway, right. So I don't notice frame compilation issues or errors on this if I keep that 1% low above 30. Tweaking to get that above 30 was a nightmare. I'd tried giving it more voltage. I tried lowering the speed. I'd tried giving it more boost voltage. All the standard things you do when overclocking just weren't working. And then, because it would drop, when I was running around town, it would just sort of randomly drop as if it was brownouting, not quite having enough power to stabilize itself. And I was like, oh man, how can I fix this? And finally, counterintuitive, I gave it an extra 40 megahertz bump. So I took it up from high 2500s to 2600, but the numbers are irrelevant. Basically, I was at the metal. I was pushing it. My pedal was already, the accelerator was to the floor. And then I just decided, oh, look, I'm just going to punch the pedal through the floor, push for another 40 megahertz. The power consumption went up 30 watt. Right? So I went from sipping power and running quietly at 250 watt to sitting on 280, 290 watt, 300 watt if I'm running a compute benchmark or something that really pushes the card. Now it's just crazy. But the difference, the difference is huge. So the frame rate lows got above 30. Now, with the exception of that courtyard that I started this dialogue in, where it seemed like the frame rate low was sitting on 58. The problem with a frame rate low of 58, basically halved that. It's telling you 29 frames a second. So I'm using frame doubling. So that's basically what's happening. If you halve those frame rates, my upper frame rate at the moment is saying 74. It's about 37 frames a second. And the low frame rate is 65, so it's about 32 frames a second. So if I spin around, everything's perfect. If I jump over to Hogwarts, where I can't get my 1% minimum, 1% lows above 30, a couple of spots on the map, if I'm doing a pan of the camera around my character, at the moment when that frame rate drops for less than half a second, I will see a doubling up of my character beside themselves. Now here's the truth. It'll happen for about 2 or 3 frames. It'll happen once every blue moon. And if I'm doing anything in the game, I won't even notice it. Now, if I'm sitting here at the screen looking for, oh, is it doing what it's meant to be doing? I might spot issues. Now, I'll give an example. When I run around town in The Witcher with a frame rate of 80, there's certain things that will trip up predictive technologies, a full camera pan, and depending if something's moving in motion left to right, right to left, little things can trip it out a little bit differently. But what I was finding was that it runs around town in certain areas, like stairs are a good one because they'll have jaggies depending on how alias they are or how high res you're running. I could certainly find at 80 frames a second when I was in areas where it was having to load something new and then panning the camera, causing it its worst case scenario moment. The resolution was dropping. The dynamic resolution scaling in terms of the generated frames, it just wasn't as good. And so when I capped my frame rate so that I was closer to just lock 60 and not drawing 20 frames a second more than I needed, it still used as much power. It still was using the extra 30 watts of power. It was not using 250, it was still up at 280. But the frames were better quality. And as someone that has been tweaking anisotropy and anti-aliasing settings since before they were vogue, right? Like anti-aliasing was just that one setting that you turn every setting up in the 90s except for anti-aliasing, and you only turn that on when your frame rate, with all the standard settings cranked, gave you the frame rate you needed and your video card wasn't pegged out fully, and then you might turn your anti-aliasing on. And that's been a thing for forever. And I've never really come across a game that needed anti-aliasing until it became vogue for games to claim they could do 4K. And then Forza Horizon came out, and you could just tell that the world box wasn't very high res, and that if you didn't turn the anti-aliasing on, like telegraph lines, which is jaggy as hell, in a way that no other game running at 4K had ever looked. It was just like, oh yeah, consumers don't understand the difference between what is the final render to screen and what is the resolution that the world's actually running at. So this is The Witcher. It's a pretty intense game. This is running all settings to the floor, to the max, and it's working, right? Now, did the game changer of frame doubling make this game go from playable to better? Not really, maybe, I don't know. I liked it at 30 frames a second on the mouse. It was good, but some games play better on a control pad. Like I put a lot of time into Hogwarts on the controller on the console, and it's great fun. And I come over to the PC version on my keyboard and mouse, and I'm like, how do I do that again? And I must admit, I like the trigger resistance and all the feedbacks of the speaker and the controller talking to me during the game. I spell my wand effects coming from that. You know, all the little things that come with the console platform. I do think vastly superior gaming experience. If gaming is measured by fun, vastly better gaming experience is console gaming. But the one benefit of PC gaming is that you can educate yourself as a computer, as an engineer, or somebody who understands how your system comes together as a whole. It's a hobby. You know, you're learning how to deal with difficulties that are enforced on you in an anti-consumer world, etc., etc. You know, there's a lot of knowledge to be gained there. We can always argue that part of the cost of a computer is the benefit of having a word processing box or something, but those arguments are kind of all gone out the door with computers being as cheap as they are. Really, as someone who's worked in office supply shops and educating customers, I always say, look, man, you're better off, rather than buying a gaming-capable laptop, buying 2 laptops, one for you, one for the kid that also needs to do work, and then go and buy a separate gaming console so you don't have to divide your time on the home TV or the blah, blah, blah. And it's in the same way that as a salesperson, I can sell a customer an inkjet and a laser printer and have them walk out of the shop with both, fully well understanding that one's going to dry up and it's constantly being replaced and it's quite costly per page, and one is going to print out the black text so sharp that you would actually submit a document to an authorizer or a review body using like a laser document because the text is so much sharper. And as a student, if you print on an inkjet, certainly it was true a decade ago, you were hindering yourself. It's just a harder document to read, legibility-wise. But look, I'm all over the place. Sorry, I've already done this video. I'm fatigued, so I'm 3-4 hours into my day now. I've made all the coffees for the party. I've even had my breakfast and stuff. All I want to do is show the Fluidmotion frames off. And tweaking for a technology is worth it. Is the technology worth using? Yes. If my frame rate is sitting at 55 frames a second and I'm just south of my VSync range, and there's something I can do to gain an extra couple of frames a second that's going to then improve the render to screen or the visibility or the usability or engagement with my game, I'll do it. I have actually turned the FSR mode on in games. I have preferred FSR 1 because it didn't have a frame gen lag. And this comes back to what I was saying about Hogwarts. Hogwarts at 30 frames a second with no frame gen lag felt way better than Hogwarts at 60 frames a second with a frame gen lag. And it's just like, well, everyone's raving about how great DLSS is, or these other competing technologies that allow people to finally game supposedly at 4K, but not really, with all the settings set to ultra. But is it nice to use? You know, if you can turn your brain off, if you've never experienced anything better, yeah, it's acceptable. But I don't know if people understand it. Like, this is, with all the ray tracing on, all these people, all the light sourcing and everything that's going on right now, how difficult open world games can be to render. And coming up with settings that will drive your game down to the ground, like here we are, right on 30, it's my frame rate lows. For me, this is a tweaked game. Right? It took me a while to get there. Am I done? Yeah, I'm done, right? I created a profile, I got it working. Now, is my GPU hotspot 35 degrees hotter than the core temperature? Yes, it is. Is that standard for a bunch of games that use the compute and the ray tracing? Yes, it is. Am I happy with that? Well, not really. Generally, I would tweak it to be 5 degrees cooler so that the fans are a lot quieter. And if I can get it 5 degrees cooler with my frame rates being where they need to be, that is a tweaked game profile. But what I like right now is I'm using this one profile across every one of my games. And that is not the way I normally do my tweaking or tuning, right? So The way it's currently tweaked is that my power lows, if I'm playing Skyrim, my GPU power is sitting about 130 watts. If I'm playing a game that uses complex compute or ray tracing, etc., I might be sitting up at 280, 290 watts. And dynamically, my video card has got a fairly good range to swing anywhere in that power envelope to pump out frames. And most games will sit here really cool and quiet. But Ghostwire Tokyo, with everything cranked, there's a couple of games that I'm finding it hard to render, that base 30 frames a second with the 1% low. But if I can hit that base 30 frames a second with the 1% low, well, these frame doubling technologies can be pretty good. I wouldn't use a frame doubling technology to get up to 30 frames. The company themselves want you to be using it with 60 frames. So if you're aiming for 120 frames and you're rendering 60 plus frames raw, the frame generation time is really, it's quick, and the persistence of a potential wrong frame on the screen is less. So the visual noise or artifacts is arguably less. But you got to tweak for that sort of stuff. Whether there's any visual artifacts or noise on the screen, whether that annoys you or not, whether you're familiar with what a game can do. Like when I put with this new frame doubling technology, I upped the resolution in Hogwarts by about 20% in my game, back to the way I experienced it on day one, just where I just wanted to see what it looked like in pretty mode. And I'm really enjoying the material, the fabrics on the costume design for the characters in that game is just fantastic. And when you go really high res and see the quality of the assets that they're putting in place. Anyway, case in point, rather than just talking about it, maybe I should do it. So look, I don't expect these settings I kind of expect my system to crash. I don't expect, these beta drivers I'm using aren't very solid. Of course, a few little glitches. The new beta drivers as of this morning fix a bit of that. They're there for the new game. This has come out, the Monkey King. And the shader compilations at the start, when compiling shaders that are doing ray tracing, is apparently massively sped up in DirectX 12 games. So Hogwarts, ever since launch, has had this DirectX 12, shader compilation screen at the start. And sometimes it does the evil one, which is it basically does it twice. And it takes a long time. So it does it the first pass off screen. So the same screen now, we're probably going to sit here for a minute while it slowly generates this. And anyone who looks at the numbers on the video card can see that it alternates between high power and nothing. Like this is an intentional bombing. Console gamers don't get it. This is all part of the platform holder at the PC platform's method to try to force console users, like to gamers onto consoles where they can actually make $1 off them on licensed hardware and annual network costs, and they get a share of every piece of software sold in the shop. They also get that. So there is a reason. You build a console platform to make money off it. And so there's a couple of players in the market. One of them is unethically, sadly, also responsible for the productivity platform that the entire world uses. And they don't mind crippling that in order to force gamers onto consoles. So it's a bit sad. Anyway, the upshot of it is that there's lots of anti-consumer tactics that are put in play, and that game companies quite often, at the last minute, will have a bunch of technologies that are optimized for AMD technologies because they're in all the consoles, and I'll have all them pulled out so that the PC version just runs like trash. And then we get all sorts of things like game mode that make games work worse, that change the priority of events. You get all the Microsoft first-party software that it's like, oh, in Forza, why do I have to set the process affinity to very low? The absolute opposite of what every other piece of software ever since the dawn of history has ever needed to make it work. Why is it that Forza requires I deactivate this core and deactivate this and do that, whatever else? It's because of the intentional cripplings on a particular platform. Anyway, once we get into this game, it's all pretty solid. Right, so please, the load times on my computer, I'm using, this is a 10 or 12-year-old computer. The drives that are in it, my best drives, I've actually given to nephews when building them gaming machines. And that means I'm actually using, for the first time in my life, cheap, shitty SSDs as my main drive. Samsung brand drives are usually about the fourth on my list of drives to look at, and the Evo one's certainly not. And I think my best games are installed on a Samsung Evo from about 10 years ago. And yeah, I've actually got some of my games loading off hard drives. In fact, I had The Witcher loading off a hard drive a couple of days ago. And I was like, oh, why does it take a minute or so to load? Oh, that's right, hard drives. Forgot about them. Forgot about how slow they work. And this was a person who always buys 10,000 RPM drives or like the Raptors or some of the Seagate really fast ones. And I like a fast hard drive, lots of cache, etc. Anyway, the point of my rant is that this machine is quite hoodwinked with a lot of parts that cost it. And the worst is that this game is on a Samsung 850 Evo, and so the Pro drives, solid state drives, have chips in them, which help with the decompression and even writing the data to them. They've basically got a slightly smarter little computer built into them. And the budget versions of drives have a lesser capable controller chip. Now that's not a problem if you're not gaming and your CPU is doing nothing, and you can rely on the computer's CPU to do the work that dedicated chips inside of other bits of hardware should be doing. But the Pro solid state drives have better controller chips. Now, when you're gaming flat out and your CPU is being used flat out by the game, that drive still being able to peg 100% data and still being able to do what it needs to do makes a difference. Now, in Hogwarts, when I do area changes, I've got an Evo drive that's going to then fall back on my CPU to help it with decompressing large amounts of data, and it all gets a bit tricky. And so you'll actually see my frame rate drops in area transitions in this game heavy, and then everywhere else in the game just being super stable. Now, the 1% low at the moment is saying you just got to halve it. So if it's saying 70, it's basically 35. I'm just going to accept that de novo is not doing anything at the moment. So let's get this thing going. Let's go for a fly, shall we? All right, so okay, so for some reason my controller is just vibrating non-stop. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's indicating wind in my face. Okay, so as I say, I've flown around for hours. These are my Witcher settings. They're quite loud in Hogwarts. The profile I was running in Hogwarts before this was absolutely silent by comparison. But just the fact that my Witcher settings are actually running in this game and it's not crashing with them, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll run with that. I'll take the extra 40 megahertz. At the moment, it makes my computer sound like a jet engine. It's saying hotspot right now, 98 degrees, which is great. I would tune for that, and I'd actually be happy with this. Here we go. So 42 frames. So it's actually dropping to about 20 frames a second here, with the frame gen trying to double that. And that's in the 1% low. So the actual frame rate there was about 25 frames a second raw, would be my guess. Which is chunky, but that was an area transition. And I really think if anybody was to see, and I don't need to stop right here, but I'll just jump down on the ground so people can see, right? The level of detail with this game at ultra settings is just ridiculous, right? The amount of grass, the amount of foliage, the amount of everything. Is just ridiculous. So yeah, I'm just flying around the map, and I think it's a fairly low-level character. I don't think I've done much with them. So it's just a case of open world games, big open spaces. The hardest genre pretty much to render is the open world game. The reason for that is that it leans on the RAM systems of a computer. There's very few games that show any frame rate benefits from faster RAM speed. The handful of games that can are generally open world games. The CPU requirements of an open world game can be quite astonishingly high, as it's got to handle loading in and loading out areas, if you will. I'm one of those people that in Skyrim opens up my U grids, so instead of it just keeping 5 zones around the player active, I'm happy with U grids at 11 or 13 or something stupid, you know. And it does start to lower your frame rate once you get up above 11, even on good machines. And the load time of a save game when you first start, if you've got Open Cities mod on and you're in like Whiterun, because it's got to like load not just Whiterun but all of the areas around it quite substantially out. It's like, wow, how is this action game still loading on a rig that'll load anything, you know, fairly well? Oh, sorry, bad flying there. So look, I mean, what I'm just trying to show here is that this is an open world game that you can really get around in it. Occasionally the level of detail maps might not be completely the same, such we watch the high detail map kick a few objects in different to the further out LOD. Very few errors though in this game. Other games like Dragon's Dogma came to market. A couple of console gamers complained, so they pulled the settings down after an art team had worked religiously for years generating a low frame rate that was always going to be a persistence of 30 frames a second. and they built all the art assets around that. And then all of a sudden somebody comes in and goes, oh no, we're going to change that. And now the LODs just don't match up, and there's just lots of glitches. Legendary Tales on a VR game, same deal. It's like, oh, look, I just want to up the frame rate in a couple of zones. So we spent years with these LODs, everything's right, but at the last minute we change a couple of things and then we don't rebuild the LOD, the level of detail map. And I mean, Unreal Engine 5 bypasses the need for all that sort of stuff. Future games, it won't be such an issue. And like here, anytime a tree becomes full screen up against the screen, it usually creates a bit of a frame issue. Sorry for flying so atrociously. I'm just going to fly up a bit. I'm trying to create frame rate lows. I'm trying to, knowing how hard some of the area transitions in this game are, and then if I get down against the grass, it's just, if I'm trying to benchmark on my own machine, I'm not trying to create a video for the web where I'm going, oh, this is how good my video card is. It's quite the opposite. I'm trying to create a video for the web where I show this is what you can do in your game with, this is what this much video card will actually make. So Lumen across grass surfaces, like, yeah, this is crazy. So probably 20 frame rate there, apparently. Saying 40, it's looking really smooth. But it kind of feels like I wouldn't play it, even on the mouse. I wouldn't have to drop down to 20 frames a second. Whereas here, it's saying 40. I'm going to assume it's 20, but it feels responsive. That's the cool thing. Okay, so do I still have the ability to do that? Okay, so yeah, as I went through the last two trees there, and just coming to the new valley in front of me, the frame rate got kind of low. So if I try to avoid fights, apologies there, what am I doing? If I try to avoid fights on area transitions, it'll probably be all right. But it's such a beautiful game. Anyone that's like, oh, Hogwarts has a lot of requirements and doesn't do anything very impressive, it doesn't justify it. It's like, well, yeah, it does. Not all people understand what they're looking at when they compare an instanced role-playing game where little zones load up, like the Outer Worlds, versus a truly open world game, which might probably more like Starfield. Don't know. I haven't looked at Starfield, but Hogwarts being a truly open world game where you can fly from anywhere to anywhere and not experience a stop loading screen. That is insane. I mean, when Dungeon Siege came out in the 90s with an engine that had been built to just allow you to go into zones without loading, it was just like, oh, this is gaming in the future is going to be fantastic. It takes a long time from when something is designed and as a tech concept comes to market and is actually used. So when you see big open world role-playing games, now I saw a screen tear just then. I actually saw one. Oh, not too impressed. But I mean, again, open world game, maxed out settings, don't mind. If occasionally there's a less than ideal frame moment. But what was I trying to say? Open world game. So Hogwarts is people don't really understand when they say that this game doesn't look better than any other game. Ultra settings on a modern game. Why my computer can run every other game with ultra settings? Why are the new games with ultra settings running so shit? The optimization's crap. It's like no. The new games, if you run them at medium settings, look as good as last year's games on high settings. And the higher settings are just taking it further. And maybe you just don't have a rig to see it, or maybe you don't know what the differences are with better color depths or whatever. Anyway, it does make a difference. And yeah, I mean, the Hunt with the new CryEngine 5.11 came out this week, and I ran it with all, I would argue, medium settings. It says high, but I can see on all my sliders, I can take them up a notch or two. And I'm only just getting just south of 60 frames a second. Oh, technically with the overclock I just put in, I'm getting a solid 60 frames a second in Hunt with settings that the game itself says it's high, but as I say on the bars, I can knock them all up one or two notches. Now, should I be so stupid as to put that game all to ultras and then complain and whinge that it doesn't run very well? No, of course I shouldn't. Is my voice worth anything when I do that? No, not really. So when Kingdom Come Deliverance came out, it was a game that a lot of people couldn't get working. And again, it was one of those games, like the console version of it depended on texture streaming, of which there's only been 2 or 3 games like Grand Theft Auto that do. And a lot of gamers at that point in the game, their consoles have been out for 3 or 4 years, and so they had highly fragmented drives. They'd uninstall a 60 gig game to install a 70 gig game and do that times 10. when you install Kingdom Come Deliverance, the 60, 70 gig game that received about 10 major updates inside of the first couple of months, and therefore had gamers installing patches that would then rewrite significant chunks of that original data, to say that it was coming up with the most fragmented, most horrible, most worst case scenario attempt at texture streaming you could ever force on a hard drive. And then gamers were complaining, going, why do I need to maintain my console, man? It's a console. Computer I'd get, but the console should just work. And it's like, well, yeah, but your console's not running the way it was out of the box. And there's a handful of games that actually require your texture streaming capabilities to be working. And so when Kingdom Come Deliverance came out, everyone said it ran like crap. And they said, but it doesn't look much better. And they'd compare against other games with trees that would have more trees or something. And it's like, yeah, but go and look at a tree in Kingdom Come Deliverance. Go and look at a fence in Kingdom Come Deliverance. And it's made up of trees, like actual trees, like branches. You can see that the farmer has come along and they've trimmed these slightly slimmer girth trunks down to being this little fence. And the number of polygons in these totally analog fences, right? Like with all the natural curvature of a trunk that a tree would come with, and a fence line being made up of 10 or 20 of them, and then a weave. Oh, brilliant. And anyway, people just didn't get it. They saw a medieval village with fences and houses and 15 villages on screen and just went, well, I've got other games that does this, but they run at faster frame rates. This game's not optimized. It's like, well, no, it's an open world RPG. It's a hard genre to render. That's why we're flying around in Hogwarts right now. Same sort of deal, just forcing all the streaming systems to be working, forcing it all to be doing its trick. And it is such a pretty game. For anyone out there that just goes, oh no, it's not prettier than any other open world RPG I've got on my machine. It's like, yeah, you show me a game with a map as big, with scenery as complex, and certainly it's the textures, the closing textures on the characters. From the first time you meet the deputy principal, you kind of looking at the materials going, oh my lord, that's right, at this time in history, clothing was, high cost, high socioeconomic, like you really, there's some amazing fashion out there, but it just comes down to the way it's built. Right, so the frame gen doesn't seem to like objects filling the screen. So as I do the broom flying with trees, I'll just try to put these ones right up against it, you can see that the frame drops there by nearly 10 frames a second on the lows in those moments. It's really hard to render. But look, I might go up a bit so we can see a bit more. I just can't begin to tell people how beautiful this game is compared to so many other games, and people just don't get it, right? Like, it's doing so much more. It's not an easy to render game at all. So games like this working well is fantastic. Now I can see my video card's not working particularly hard. It's saying utilization is about 70-80%, and the frame rate was, I'm only using 200 watts of power there, so I might fly into some sequences that cause me a little bit harder to render. There we go. Speed's gone back up. Utilization's gone back up. Power draw's gone back up. Okay. So yeah, like this game's stunningly pretty. So do you tweak your open world games to run at 100 frames a second? Yeah, I don't know. It's an action game. Maybe might be some benefit to it. But for a game like this, that's all about the beauty. Someone that grew up reading the books before the movies were made, raised my kid reading those books before we'd watch the movies, and someone that really appreciates a lot about the world that has been built up in this little fantasy catch here, little cache maybe. It's a little bit unique, isn't it, the old Hogwarts? Other games have attempted, other books and whatnot are trying to cash in on wizarding schools and whatnot, but I think I've done a pretty good job with this one. And going back in the history of the game, a couple hundred years before the canon that everyone is familiar with is written, is fantastic. It just gives them a lot of freedom to do whatever they want, to introduce characters and stay true to the world, but a bit of license to have some fun with it. So look, anyone who can see this streaming can see how nice it all looks. Until the recent beta drivers with the Fluidmotion frames came out. It's not tech we're meant to be talking about. I don't think everyone knows it exists. I mean, everyone knows that AMD's, because 9 out of 10 people who buy video cards buy an NVIDIA. So most people are under the adage of, oh, AMD's playing a slow catch-up game. But AMD reps are actually saying, oh, NVIDIA is kind of doing it wrong and are behind the game. And the way AMD does it is that every game benefits from it. You don't need to optimize on a per title basis. Right? That's polite, it's friendly, and it doesn't allow an anti-consumer movement of trim every video card that's more than 18 months old. You know, lean on the shaders, the short shaders and the heavy shaders incorrectly, and you can vary any NVIDIA card since Fermi where they had short and large shaders. If your driver team wants to, you can affect the performance of any NVIDIA card since Fermi by a factor of 20 to 40% just by where you assign the work to be done. And that's huge. Combine that with DLSS and a bunch of black boxes that consumers don't really know what's going on, and you've forever created a situation where you can make the new mid-level card outperform 2 generations ago flagships. Okay, so this game, the newest patch of the game, culls the memory that was open behind me. As soon as I came into the castle, it dropped the outside zone. So that's kind of huge. But look, that's just the current build of this game. I think after they optimized it for Nintendo Switch, a lot of the PC stuff got quite heavily yanked. That's why I stopped playing it. It's like, oh man, each update that comes out, like versus the version of the game I was playing on launch. Anyway, so yeah, this is when I first got this game. None of these doors would create any delay when loading. So either it's the new version of the game, but more than likely it's that I've moved the game onto a slower drive, and it just can't quite load the next section before I get there. So I'm just running down this particular room here in the basement that just drops the frame rate down to like 20 frames a second easily if you've got all your settings correct. So for me, it's a pretty good benchmark. It makes the card run really loud. Quite often will crash my machine if my optimization, if my overclocks aren't the power headroom needed to keep running. So that's it here, right? So with my current settings, my 1% lows are well above 30. That's huge. So I'm really stoked about that. That's a hard to render zone of the game. Normally my frame rate gets a bit chunky. If I'm on a wireless controller and the turning speed varies based on the frame rate, I find running out of this little zone quite hard. And with the current settings, it's maintaining the same turn speed. It's awesome. And this little zone here, cutting through the corridor, yep, that camera's perfect. It's predictable. Therefore, the usability of this game is fantastic. So, trying to run through these zones are not so ideal. I'm expecting some of these doors to get a bit janky. Wow, okay, so it's kept up. It's figuring out where I'm running. It must be preloading the next section. Basically what I find is if I load a save game here and then try to run outside, there's the load. But if I run around the castle in a predictable way, it gets ahead of it. So normally I don't have any delay on those doors there. But again, that's more my machine. You shouldn't be playing on a 10-year-old SSD that's not been maintained and is a budget version of an SSD even back then. Probably not fair to this game. All right, so what have I missed? There we go. So look, to say that this game works well, this is one of the hardest games to render, is a bit of an understatement. The fact that I can now render this game using the newest technology that will be out shortly, and without this game being specifically optimized for. Right, so there's a bunch of games that are FSR 3 optimized and Fluidmotion 2 optimized. I think it's hard to render tiles. Baldur's Gate was one of them. There was a few games in the list that all interested me. Dragon's Dogma 2 was one of them, games that might benefit or need it. But what I like is going back to a slightly older game like this and just using tech that hasn't been optimized specifically for this game and just brute forcing it. And now having more options in my brute forcing of it that significantly increase the usability or the enjoyment to be found from the software. So as I say, I used to have to play this game on mouse. I would lock my frame rate to 30, but flawless. Oh, flawless. It was so good. And you go, oh no, 30 is horrible. It's like, no, 30, but indistinguishable from 60 or 100. And it's like, no, not indistinguishable from 100, surely. It's like, well, yeah, if you're playing at 100 frames, but generating with frame lag, trust me, my 30 with no latency, immaculate. So, but that did require a mouse. It did require a setup. If I moved to a wireless controller, the delay of waiting for 30 frames a second to render it to the screen at north of 20 millisecond times, no good. But with this game, and as you can see there, frame gen lag at 14 or 16 milliseconds. Ideally, at 16 or less milliseconds is ideal. If I then go in and tweak to lock my upper frame rate and just force it to render it at 60 frames a second and drop pre-rendered frames that aren't needed if another frame is just going to get to that screen inside of 16 milliseconds and keep that smoothness up with ideally no micro stutter, no bad 1% lows, yay. But I mean, this game is exceptional. Okay, there's a sunrise happening over here, so let's just click that button, hang on, click that button, and then click that button. All right. So, look, I see some big differences in the resolution of this game. I found when I'd run around Hogsmeade a lot to do my benchmark tests and played with all the different frame doubling technologies and all the different methods. And what I found is that they all dropped the resolution so much that looking at the grass, the game lost a lot of its niceness. Whereas here, I don't feel like I'm running at, like this is what feels like the highest resolution I've ever run this game at, and I see it. And I see it in everything I'm doing. And the frame rate lows I'm currently experiencing, I don't really notice. As someone who has trained themselves over decades to be super sensitive to it and to spot it if it's happening, yeah, I can spot it. But at the moment, if I play this game, and if I wasn't just benchmarking like I am now, trying to generate the worst stuff on the screen, hang on, like the worst stuff on the screen in worst case scenarios, like that's pretty hard to render what I'm rendering right now on the screen. That's kind of hard to render. And unless I'm in an area transition on the map of which there's only a handful, that in any given play session, you're not going to experience a bunch of them, certainly not inside of 5 minutes of each other, unless you're just trying to fly one end of the map to another end of the map, which makes no sense when there's all sorts of fast travel systems in play if you absolutely needed to do that. I don't think this is a game with a bunch of fetch quests that sends you on crazy chase your tail loops. So it works. It works well. It's supreme, again, a use of technology at a time where it matters and makes a practical difference. Do we want to watch the sunrise on? That's not the one. On the castle. I've inverted my flight controls so it finally flies predictably for me, but I've got to fight against many hours of it not working that way. Oh, can I do a Lumen? No, that's not the Lumen button. Shit. Maybe I can't cast spells on Brim. I don't think I can, actually. Anyway, it's a stupidly pretty game, stupidly large draw distances, stupidly high detail, great to absolutely bog a machine down, great tech bench. This is a 4-year-old video card, absolutely optimized to spit out 2500 megahertz, drawing 250 watt of power, and I'm below 100 degrees on my hotspot, meaning my fans will be running quiet, meaning I could play this for hours and hours and hours, be very happy with the experience. So it's a case where driver technology evolution, massive difference. They say it's fine wine, but over time it just gets better and better. I would concur that that's a thing. I mean, it follows the video card thing that everybody did since the 90s, was that you optimize your drivers for your older cards first, because that's what you needed to do. It was the older cards that were having the hardest time with the new games, whereas the new cards could just brute force them, it wasn't an issue. And somewhere along the way, it became vogue to optimize for the new cards, because you could then sell the new cards, showing how much better they were than the old cards, at which point there was no motivation to then fix up the old cards at all. And so I was deeply worried when AMD described their Fluidmotion frames technology and how it would leverage the strengths on the 6000 series cards in ways that they're like, oh, we don't know if we want these new technologies to come to market because it's going to make some of the older series cards look better than the new series of cards. It's not going to look good for us. So you can understand why they would feel that way. I kind of started to wonder if my cards, if these technologies were going to come out. And they have, and it's great. So cards like mine that kind of aren't sure which way they're leaning, if there's rasterization or compute. They're sort of good at both. Jack of all trades, master of none. It is good to have something in play that will use the card, and even on older titles, find ways to use aspects of the die that aren't used in these titles. So Outer Worlds, beautiful game. What I was finding was that I could sit at 55 frames a second. So this is a great case of turning on FSR or something to gain that extra 10% frame rate needed to sit at a solid lock 60. But this game, a great example of a card sipping 180 watts of power if it doesn't need to do anything to render 60 frames a second. And then when the camera starts panning around, we'll see the power consumption jump up to like 260 watts or something. It'll still be trying to push 60 frames a second. The hotspot will go up, everything. So this is not an ideal profile for this game. I've actually got a different profile for Space's Choice. For Outer Worlds. And it gets me a much better frame rate, gets much better frame rate lows, runs a lot cooler, quieter. But I'm really enjoying having one profile to suit them all. And sure, my average frame rate and tomb rate drops from 95 to 92 across the benchmark test. If I don't run a tweaked profile specific for that game, I don't really care. For 3 to 5%, most consumers need 10% changed in order to notice an actual change. So if it's only a couple of percent, don't really care. So ease of just having one profile on my computer that just renders every game and does it well, I'm very happy with. Okay, well, that's not what I was saying would happen at all. It's very power efficient here now. I had this running for a couple of hours this morning while partner and I were having coffees and whatnot. And yeah, it was just, using a massage gun on the partner, but needing something on in the background to just toast my computer up, warm it up. Quite often leave Colin McRae running overnight on a benchmark loop sort of thing. Okay, so there's visual noise to me on the step of the building behind us when it's panning. I thought that was part of FSR, and I even noticed there's some noise and some textures on the walls. So I turned FSR off and just went back to brute forcing it, and lost my 5 frames a second. So I was running at 55 frames a second, slightly higher power draw, and I still saw visual noise and still saw some artifacts on some of the edges. So yeah, it wasn't worth turning it on or off. But it depends on the game. The FSR mode isn't always an upscaler. Hang on, a frame gen. There's a couple of different aspects to it. Look, but I don't care. Look, I've had FSR 1 in Hogwarts. FSR and FSR 2 implementations are quite different to, say, games like this. In Hogwarts, FSR 1 doesn't have any frame gen lag because it doesn't do frame gen, and so I could also set it in quality mode to run at a higher resolution. So FSR in Hogwarts made sense to me more than FSR 2. But I found when rendering it, there was enough graphical issues in the FSR rendering. More so if you're flying over a body of water sideways with your broom to the map, you could see glitches. Again, if you're looking for them. But yeah, there's current frame doubling, and not even having to turn my FSR on, or just being able to enjoy. There's three settings in my drivers that just allow me to tweak every game to within an inch of their life. Well, that's fantastic. I don't need to wait 6 months for a driver team to finally decide I'm allowed to have a game, and then a year from now decide that I'm no longer allowed to have new games, and then tweak my card to perform 20% worse, so I go out and buy a new card. I'm happy running a 4-year-old card. The performance of this card looks like it's going to get me through the next few years quite happily. And then my sub $1,000 video card I'll be able to sell on for a significant amount of my money back just because of its performance level. And maybe buy a new product. Personally, I won't. I like quiet gaming. I like brute force gaming. Console gaming is definitely the future based on the PC ecosystem. I say that as a person who's been overclocking PCs since the early 90s and middle 90s more so. The Celeron 300A, that's the classic one. 300 megahertz up to 450 with a single jumper change if you bought the right motherboard. 502 megahertz if you had a good sample. Didn't mind a slightly better cooler. I'd overclock my mouse, PS2 rate back in the 90s. On your PS2 bus, you could do that. I've been overclocking stuff since forever. None of this stuff is a drama for me. I'm quite happy to tweak and benchmark and run my hardware monitor and try to spot power peaks and try to figure out what a computer is doing at any given moment when it's rendering, and I can generally figure out what's going on. And as someone who's quite confident and set up their first PC business in the early 90s, someone who's quite confident in the PC space and hardware, I do not enjoy gaming on a PC. And case in point, not being able to boot up any piece of software reliably. Let's say twice, but that's excessive. Let's say 10 times, right? If I was a trucker and my job required me to go out on the road and leave my family behind and trust that my children could use the gaming box that I've built them on the basis that they're not paying network costs annually, like for all the costs that console gaming gives, it's like, no, we'll buy you a hobby, son, daughter, learn how to use a computer, child. And yeah, as a hobby, learning to use a computer, that's what it's all about. But the actual gaming component is just a nightmare. And Forza was a brilliant example. You could never turn it on twice, but it was software designed to be crippled on the PC. It was designed, optimizing my PC, a 10-minute process at the start of turning your game on that would then default all the settings to the worst possible settings. It just constantly leaves the game in all the worst possible. Like, right, PC gaming, when it's constantly fighting you, and I mean, I've got a Dolby Atmos plugin. I think it's a paid-for plugin, but it's like every second boot, you got to go in and reconfigure that. And then each time you start a game, you might have to hit mute and unmute in order for it to handshake with the amplifier. And magically, I've lost HDR going through that amp when I used to have HDR going through that amp, so I don't know what's going on there. I can sort that out, sure. But PC gaming, constantly fighting the system. Not into it. Not into it at all. And that's Windows and forced driver updates. So look, it's the hardware scheduler now, only in Windows 11, the one getting the updates. So a hardware scheduler inside your operating system that assigns what software runs on what threads. It never mattered when all your threads had the same type of math function, but now they have different threads. There might be performance threads, economy threads, if you will. And some of them do math slightly differently. And you can't hand math over that's been done, started in one. You can't. They just go, oh, the output result from that core now merge with the math on that core. All sorts of latencies come in, all sorts of weights. And so you need the hardware scheduler to know about modern hardware. And Microsoft, in order to force people into Win 11, are stratifying the market and going, oh yeah, no, Win 10, that's a depreciated platform now. It doesn't get any further support, and we're quite happy to damage the operating system in ways that Win 11 will then bounce back, but then Win 10 won't, right? And so Microsoft, the bastards who went to market 4 years ago and asked all players to generate overlays because they knew that games running in a window generally run 30% worse or significantly worse than games running full screen. And so Microsoft just determined to make PC hardware very ineffective, so a low-powered Xbox can look very equal to it, right? Hence the flight sim debacable, where they weren't using the multi-core flight sim, right? Like, if anybody remembers Flight Sim 10 coming out around about the year 2000, and then having to buy the acceleration pack in order to get multi-core CPUs to render in multi-core, right? The acceleration pack allowed you to use up to 256 CPU cores. But when Steam version of Flight Sim 10 finally came out, it didn't come out with the acceleration pack. It was a single core only game. And so when the game ran like shit on PC for yonks and yonks and yonks, but when the Xbox version comes out, and the team says, oh yeah, a representative from Microsoft actually turned up and showed us an old trick to use multi-core, and then that's the console version, right? It looks really good versus Ninja PCs, and that's what they always want. They want somehow a shitty console to work well against a PC. And so they've got to come up with methods to load, to make your PC's memory really ineffective, or to make your drives really ineffective so a console can hold its own against it. They will. Anyway, it's not meant to be a rant and a rave, not meant to be a negative discussion, but so far, look, a lot of these games in static screens have been working. In terms of open world games, I can't really push much past open world games. They're the hardest to render. If I render something like Rise of the Tomb Raider, and I've got a pretty strong feeling with these current settings, it's going to crash. Although I've probably got profiles in which change the settings a little bit for this game. I think probably ups the RAM speed. Normally on the overlay down the bottom there, I've usually got things like showing, which allows me to see what profile I'm running. Some of them I'll run the RAM speed up at 2100 megahertz, some I'll run at 2220 megahertz, 2240 I think is my upper limit. Start to get little green dots on the screen that the VRAM can either use a little bit more power or a little bit more cooling. So yeah, easing off from 2236 I think is the upper RAM limit I can push. But if I drop it back to 2000, it just runs, arguably uses a little bit less power from the core, and it seems to just run. Very few games benefit in terms of frame rate by upping that RAM speed, which is a bit weird. Usually that multiplies out as part of your total bandwidth number is. But I don't seem to be ever bandwidth constrained on this rig. Look, these are not the most impressive numbers I've ever had when running this benchmark. So yeah, there we go. GPU hotspot sitting 99. It's not sitting up at 107. There's an A-list edge in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen there, which doesn't matter what level of anti-aliasing and what level of resolution I run the game at, I cannot get rid of that A-list edged. This here, I used to run this game at 4 frames a second. It would start this sequence. Currently it's sitting at there about 70. Look, I haven't got the Fluidmotion frames on. See the frame gen lag there? So these are raw frames. This is actually what my video card can draw. This game's got a stereoscopic mode, and so about 8 years ago, I had a Steam Link, which was a dedicated little box you could hook up to your TV, and then if you used your Steam software to send from your computer to your Steam box, you could kind of render your game on your computer, but you could play it in your lounge room, as an example. Not my best numbers at all on that screen, although to be fair, the minimums, if I run this benchmark 6 times, the minimum frame on any one of those sections could be 60, like north of 60. But the max frames generally is pretty consistent. I can quite often get the geothermal value above 100 on the max, above 200 on Mountain Peak. So not my best, but I mean an overall score of an average of 95 thereabouts is what I know this video card should be doing. To do that relatively quietly, I'm very happy with. So yeah, those settings are fine. Oh, I wish I could finish up the thread I was just talking about. Talking about something. We got quick game. So software trying to bomb. Oh, Hunt Showdown, which is gorgeous. Please let me load up Hunt Showdown for anyone out there that wants to see what the game looks like with just the medium settings. Let's have a look at that one, shall we? Oh dear. But yeah, these new display drivers are beta drivers. They've added this frame doubling technology. I think it's pretty nice. Do I wish to use it in the right software? Yes. Would I use it? Yes. I don't think, for example, as an online competitive shooter, I wouldn't turn frame doubling on. Tomb Raider, because I didn't need it. You know, I could brute force that game at 4K with everything ultra. Happy to do that. But if a game, if you're just a short a little bit, or if it's, you want a highly detailed role-playing game world. Now, Dragon's Dogma, probably not. I'd be unsure how I would play Dragon's Dogma. It's a sort of an arcade beat-em-up game. If you think like Arkham Asylum, Batman Arkham Asylum. We haven't had good arcade beat-em-ups for a long time. But games like Double Dragon, Golden Axe back in the 90s, and Dragon's Dogma really feels like that. It's the most arcadey of all the bugger, I forgot about that. The most arcadey of all the modern RPGs, not by a small amount. Okay, that software is definitely in full screen mode. Doesn't like tagging out. Oh, okay, I might have just crashed my video drivers. Okay, so my overclock must be close by power levels because the video drivers bounce back. Now, I had no issues with the video drivers prior to this one, the non-betas. These betas have been the buggiest drivers I've used in a while. Alrighty, so just going to, do I not have a network up? Of course I don't. My phone that I'm recording with is my network device. Okay, well I just added a lame bit of extra to my video for no reason whatsoever. Look, Ziggurat's always a good one to wind up on. Look, I think I've done all my hardest to render games. Kingdom Come Deliverance, I can sit on pretty solidly. Here we go, Ghostwire Tokyo. So this is one that I expect will just crash out the machine. Please excuse me. Oh dear. Yes, days of late nights and early starts. It's all been rather exciting though. I'm liking in the last week for me getting a bunch of my games to work. So The Witcher with the ray tracing, when it first came out, it would actually make my video card cook. All the ray tracing games did. Portal RTX, Quake RTX, anything with ray tracing. It was obvious that a particular company in the market is setting its math. It works the BV8 structure from the top down, the AMD from the bottom up, right? There's differences. And when one company is engineering against the weaknesses of the other card, I come up with all these moments in my games where technically my card has the hardware to do what the competitors can do, but because of software modifications that always come about in an update, classic example, Portal RTX I can no longer start because it's locked out a settings screen, and it's now got like the old settings screen, which had 7 options, is now just one box DLSS, right? Like, anyway. Yeah, so, some games like NVIDIA, they've worked with a particular company doing particular anti-consumer shit, and what we end up with is a deprecated market for everyone. So look, I've lost my numbers on the screen here. Let me just bring up my... No, so they're not working. Right, so I crashed my drivers before when closing Hunt. It, as a game, pushes my video card pretty hard. These beta drivers are flaky as hell. And it's fair to say it couldn't do it. All right, so I'm just going to reload the display drivers. Come back to my game. No, that was it. Oh. Okay, yeah, so the clocks that game wants to run don't work well. I need to run a different profile for that game. And I mean, I can. I mean, probably just starting the game with my display drivers already loaded would make a difference. I assume they're working. They look to be. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Let's see what happens. So the little error that just happened there was a DirectX issue, which if your overclock isn't quite good enough, you'll start to see that. And so usually you just bump up your voltage a little bit more, or improve your cooling, or knock the raw speed down by a little bit. There's a range of ways you can get on top of it. And then you just fix it and the problem goes away. And so the other day I found a perfect sequence in Ghostwire Tokyo that would keep creating DirectX issues if the overclocks weren't any good. And so it was great. I was using it to tweak a whole bunch of other game settings. So they're just trying out a bunch of settings that I was optimizing for in a different game. They're coming back over to this one going, okay, is it really enough? Because again, my ultimate goal is to build one profile to rule them all. I don't want one game requiring 2600 megahertz and a RAM speed 200 megahertz slower, and then an inverse of that, 200 megahertz less on the core, but 200 megahertz faster RAM, just to make another game work, right? Like I'd rather I just want one set of settings to rule them all. So for the first 10 seconds when the game comes in, it runs at about half frame rate. That's not a de novo thing. Actually, in Hogwarts, you can see when de novo kicks in. It just hard hammers the frame rate for no reason. You can leave the machine running overnight or a week and it's fine, and then it just don't for no reason. Yeah, it's de novo. But in this game, beyond that first 10 seconds when it builds the world in, it generally bounces right back up. So, owie. These are not running my settings at all. Okay, so what we've got there, 27, 24. So I've got frame rate lows of 24, frame rate highs of 27. So for me, that's completely unusable. So what I do here is I just click over to performance and I go to tuning, and then I find my profile, which is an import, and I go testing this one, I load it, and I go proceed, and it changes all my numbers accordingly. I click back over, and now what have we got? Okay, so just give it a moment to compile the world, because the 99th percentile there dropped down to 6. Okay, so I see a frame rate change there of 1 frame. My power consumption's gone up massively. My temperature's gone up noticeably. I can only guess my fans are running like crazy. My GPU is totally used at 99. Okay, so it's starting to bounce back a little bit. But these are still the worst numbers I've seen in this game for Yogs. At all, actually. I don't know what is going on here. Bit disappointing. Maybe if I exit and restart the game, don't know. I mean, it responds fairly quickly with the mouse. And it looks pretty. Don't get me wrong. This is a fully maxed out Ghostwire Tokyo, and it does look pretty. It's but yeah, the frame rate lows there, dropping down to 17. And I must admit, once I started playing with frame doubling, I came in here and I cranked up the 2 settings I'd lowered. I think I'd lowered the resolution down to 1800 rather than 4K. But yeah, no frame gen lag, no FSR, none of that nonsense. Just trying to make a game brute force. But I think looking down that particular bit of roadway there is one of the worst case scenarios in the game, and it does bomb out my low percentage more than any other section. But normally my upper frame rate here is above 30, and I like to keep it that way. But it does look so pretty. But just due to the speed of this game, I could see it there slowing down a little bit. Felt like a judder, just because it couldn't render the right minimal time. Would I play a game like this in eye candy mode? Yeah, maybe. But this game does benefit from speed. Probably it'd be a nice one to sit at least 40 frames a second in. And I did find the frame doubling was all right, but if you can't get that 99th percentile up above 30, the frame doubling can be a bit of a nightmare. So Ghostwire Tokyo is not ready for this new technology at fully maxed at fully high res, right? And there we go. The AMD drivers, I think, just kicked in then, right? So I'm probably not giving the video card enough power to run while the software at the front is hammering it. But yeah, I've seen a lot better in this sequence. Anyway, you've got to know your games. You've got to know your products. I'm just happy. Each time The Witcher runs so flawlessly, I'm just like, brilliant. And now that I can add Hogwarts and The Witcher to a list of titles I can play full ray tracing on, fully maxed out, and fully enjoyably, it is epic. Now, I mean, not all games are perfect, and it's always going to come down to the programming. You can always find examples of, frame rate drops in games. I can sit in something like Skyrim, and it's just sipping and not using any power, and then you watch it drop a frame, and you're like, yeah, but my video card's only at 30% use. Why not actually let me why not force it? It doesn't always work that way. It's the Microsoft titles are the worst. Every piece of software on my computer, the Microsoft titles consistently have the errors and the back-end ways in them that is back to front of what's expected in the computing industry, and just basically evidence every step of the way that they're trying to be a nightmare. Okay, so we got no frame gen lag here. Now the reason why I've loaded up this particular fire, this is a fire that just doesn't make sense, right? You get it out of the way and you're sitting at 60 frames a second. I'm looking back at a city right now, and it should in a moment bounce back. There we go, and the low frame is at 52, right? But above 50 with the high frame being 60. And that low frame rate, this current profile doesn't do well with the low frame rate. But look, it's a pretty enough game. It's a very basic game. They made like over 10,000 modifications to this game, getting it ready for the console. And it was one of the few games that worked on dual video cards on a PC, and you could brute force it to just be absolutely beautiful. And it's a slow-paced game. You didn't need it at 60 frames a second. But instead, they made like a whole bunch of console optimizations. They made the game look way worse and perform way worse in terms of you could no longer make it the pretty game it was. And then after all of that, this is what we get. And yeah, that fire is dropping my frame rate by like 10 frames a second. And there's just nothing about it that's that special. But nobody's written home about how wonderfully optimized Bud's Tale is. So you're always going to find examples on a PC where it doesn't matter how much hardware you throw at a given issue, it's going to have issues. It's going to perform less than ideal. That being said, I'm seeing the motion blur create issues at this point in the game, and my guess is that the motion blur involves a shader, and that the first time it's being generated, that shader's being created, and therefore the first instance of motion blur on a per game play is probably the worst. I do know that when I've been playing this game for any amount of time, it's usually pretty solid. I'm just playing with a little trackball, wireless trackball under my fingers right now. It's quite fun, just flicking the camera. catch up. Anyway, I guess I've become one of those chewy YouTube channels, at least this video, where it's the casual, disenchanted voice just talking about gaming, maybe in general, PC gaming in general. I don't know. AMD video card using for the win. That's it. Paying 10, 20, 30% less money for a card that might be 10% slower, which just technically means that by upgrade path, you've got 30% of your money ready for your next video card, and yeah, you're 10% behind the ball to start off with, meaning you probably want to upgrade your card sooner, but you've got a lot of money in the kitty towards that goal when you finally need to. It's one way of looking at it, I suppose. Look, it is nice having flagship cards that you can brute force anything in and have that future-proofiness. No such thing. There's no future-proofiness in an NVIDIA ecosystem. If you buy a card, within 18 months, it's going to be deprecated through drivers. Within 3 years, they're going, especially if you're in vogue and you're trying to play the latest games that have been NVIDIA optimized, getting in mediocre performance. You know, once you drink into that Kool-Aid, it's an expensive investment that you keep doubling down on and you keep going for, and or you just draw a line in the sand and say, I won't support businesses that are not ethical towards consumers, but, in terms of removing value from purchases, that your hard-won money, right? There's nothing in life that's particularly fun with regards to earning money. Your hard-won money, and you want, for those brief moments in life when you're taking a break from all the crap, you want to just be able to offline and have fun. I don't find PC gaming as good for that, but if you want to feel good about the world, feel good about yourself, and save a shitload of money and support ethics in the PC space, and support a company that's building lots of consumer innovation that works for everybody, then AMD is the way. I don't say it as a fanboy of any video card company. Matrox was probably my preferred of the three big dogs of the 90s. You know, ATI had good 2D picture quality, better text than just about any NVIDIA card at a desktop level. Past analog monitors now. Look, I don't know what else there's not much else I can run on my machine that will just bog it down. I'll show you how long it takes to load Open Cities on Skyrim with an old drive, although not a hard drive. Missed it by that much. Okay. So Skyrim, it's not a particularly hard game to run, is it? Well, it once was. People forget that a Nintendo Switch can run the game. There's enough grunt to equal what was a good machine when Skyrim came out. And that anyone I see watching Skyrim on a Switch generally sits there with their mouth open going, oh my lord, this is incredible. It's like, well, it is when you think about it, because it's the few watts of power that a Switch consumes, which factors in the screen and the speakers and everything as well, on top of the fact that there's not really an active cooling solution. You know, you're not sitting there listening to a bunch of fans. Spinning. Alrighty, so there we go. 130 watts of power, 120 watts of power being consumed, 40% of the GPU being used. But you know, it's good to have good frame rate in an action game. All right. Skyrim. There we go. Open Cities falls apart when you actually open a door to a building. You still have to have a loading time. Oh dear. Anyone who's ever seen Skyrim in VR, the moment that blew me away was walking into this kitchen. Just here. And just the sense of the size of it, and the sense of looking up at the rafters and seeing what was hanging down to dry, and just Skyrim in VR is a totally different game. Totally different game. So that's my motivation in the last week with the VR.